Peter J. Shield. Welcome to my special guest, and a very special guest today. I'm very privileged to have with me the Clark County Coroner, Mike Murphy. Mike, thank you so much for coming in today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Been a real privilege. What sparked this interview was, in fact, the introduction of your new website, which, of course, featured unidentified people discovered in and around the Las Vegas area. And we'll touch on that a little bit later in our program today. But I'd like, if I may, Mike, during this get-together, to discuss a little bit the career path that led you to becoming a county coroner. The interest, of course, in that type of work through the advent of CSI and CSI Miami, of course, and the new JAG one, which escapes me for the moment, but which also looks at crime scene investigation in one form or another, has certainly fired the nation's interest. What led you to get into this career, and what was your career path up to this time?
Well, I will tell you that I certainly didn't start out in high school or shortly after that thinking I would end up being the coroner of Clark County, Nevada. But I do have a law enforcement background. I've been in law enforcement since 1972.
Wow.
Was a police officer in Kansas City for about 8 years. Came to Nevada in 1980. I worked for the Boulder City, Nevada Police Department for about 10 years. Then went to the Mesquite Police Department. Was there for 9 years as their chief of police.
When did you leave there?
I left there in 99.
Oh, right, about the same time I did.
Yeah.
I lived there for 2 years.
There you go. So
Absolutely
I was
loved
out there for 9 years. Completed that work during that explosive growth that Mesquite had.
Right,
You were
absolutely.
very familiar with that. Came back to the city of Las Vegas and was a deputy chief for them. And Ron Flood, who's an old friend of mine, announced that he was going to be retiring as the coroner after 19 years. He was at that time the second coroner of Clark County. Dr. Otto Ravenholt was the first. And we discussed the possibility of me applying for the job. There were about 46 applicants. There's only two ways you can be the coroner in Clark County. One is to have been prior law enforcement with 5 years experience in Nevada, 5 years investigative experience, and 5 years management experience,
Wow.
or to be a doctor. What most people are not familiar with is that we have 4 forensic pathologists who are medical doctors that work. They do the actual autopsy work. The coroner in Clark County is the administrator of the office and operates the office. There are 3 basic parts to our office.
Right.
The first part is the forensic or the medical issues. The second is our death investigators. They're the ones that go out on the scenes and assist law enforcement. And the third is our administrative staff, and they're the ones that assist in completing the death certificates and doing all the medical transcription work and providing all the administrative paperwork that goes along with the process.
Yes, I personally would have assumed, and I suppose most of our viewers might also, that it was absolutely necessary to have a medical background to become a coroner. But that's obviously not the case.
It is not the case, although I will tell you, people have asked me what the learning curve has been like. After I came to the office, and the county was very kind to allow a transition period between the time Ron announced that he was going to retire and the time he left. We were together for about 9 months. That period of time involved 12 to 16-hour days, 7 days a week. The investigative part of the organization was fairly easy to work with because I had that background. The administrative part of it I had in the management. The medical learning curve I've described not as a curve, but literally a vertical step, or vertical climb, so to speak. And that has been a unique experience for me. I've spent literally, we did kind of that walk in the shoes of the employee, and so I spent time with the investigators. I spent about a month in the back in our working with our forensic staff, actually assisting with the autopsies and the whole process that goes on with that. And then from there, spent time with the administrative staff and actually spent some time with our custodial staff.
It's obviously a fascinating field. For you, what has been the most, I guess, exciting aspect of what you do now as opposed to what you were doing as just law enforcement?
Well, in law enforcement, you deal with a variety of different things, everything from the dog barking call to the homicide. In this particular line of work, everything we do is what I call the e-ticket or the high adventure scenario, and that is It involves the absolute ultimate case, which is the death investigation case, whether that is a natural death involving an elderly person, or whether that's unfortunately the homicide of a child as a result of an abuse or neglect situation. And I think the other part of it is that in our particular line of work, in the coroner's office, we see all facets of that death, not only the investigative side of it, but our investigators also have to be part social worker because we're responsible for going out and doing the notification of the families and letting them know what's going on.
Sure. And I guess that's a very big part of what you do, that communication to the relatives of the deceased.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier today that you go out as the coroner only on multiple homicides or multiple deaths. Is that
Multiple
the case
deaths.
at the moment?
What I've established is a criteria that, of course, if you look at the sheer numbers of what we do in Las Vegas, there are basically 27 deaths a day that occur. Not all of those are violent deaths. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of those are natural deaths. But the assistant coroner and I have established a policy that if there is a death involving 2 or more individuals, whether it's a multiple death on a car crash or a homicide, suicide, or a death involving any law enforcement action, because of our requirement to conduct a coroner investigation on those and a coroner inquest on law enforcement action, then we respond directly to the scene. So that requires us to be out after our normal business hours, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week.
Right. Well, I mean, we watch the CSIs of this world, as I mentioned in the opening segments. To what extent does what you do, I guess, relate to the real world scenario to that which we see on television? Is there any similarity?
Sure, there is a lot of similarities, but I think what folks need to remember is that CSI is a fascinating show. It has a great viewership. It's one of the reasons why we actually conduct public tours now at the coroner's office once a month. You can call our office. We'll be more than happy to schedule someone to go to that tour. But they have combined several different characters or several different work groups into maybe 1 or 2 characters for the purpose of continuity for their show.
Right.
And some of the things they're able to do that certainly we can't. We don't solve our crimes in 60 minutes or less, and we don't do it without commercial and only with a flashlight.
Right.
But I can tell you that the similarities are that we do respond to crime scenes. We are dealing with decedent families.
Right.
The police have the responsibility of dealing with the suspect. They have the responsibility of the crime scene itself. And here in Clark County, the coroner's office has the responsibility of the body itself and the evidence related to the body, and then of course the autopsy and providing medical legal death investigation in reference to that.
And that forensic investigative work that we see done in such great detail on programs such as the one we're talking about, in real terms, does that happen in your department, in your office, or?
It happens in conjunction with the local law enforcement agency. Many of those, of course, are the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and their crime scene analyst unit, although it can include Boulder City, Henderson, North Las Vegas, several different law enforcement agencies. So it is a collaborative effort that's done between the crime scene people that are out in the field and then our people that are back at the office.
I want to come back in our next segment and talk a little bit about a fascinating program that you have in your department. I was going to apply, I would advise you, but I noticed that there are no vacancies, so I had to curtail my application. But we'll tell you all about that fascinating subject when we come back. My special guest is Mike Murphy from the Clark County Coroner's Office, and we're talking about the whole process of criminal investigation from the Clark County Coroner's Office point of view.